7 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific, there is a place where sunlight has never reached and never will. A world of black, crushing water, colder than your fridge, and heavier than anything you have ever felt. For almost all of human history, we were certain that nothing could live down here. The pressure alone, we believed, would flatten a living cell, dissolve bone and shell, and bring the delicate machinery of life to a complete standstill. It was, by every measure we had, a dead world, the one corner of our own planet where life simply could not exist. And then, in 1960, 2 men in a steel sphere fell all the way to the bottom of it, and something moved. Think about that for a moment. We have mapped the far side of the moon in more detail than this. We have landed machines on Mars, flown probes past Neptune, and photographed the surface of the sun. And yet the deepest place on our own planet, a scar in the seabed deep enough to swallow Mount Everest whole, remains almost completely unknown to us. Nearly everything we have learned about it has come from a handful of dangerous dives, a few dangling cameras, and the occasional broken, half-dissolved creature dragged up in a net, so distorted by the journey that we can only guess how it was ever meant to look. The deep ocean floor is the last unexplored frontier on Earth, and it is right here beneath us. So what is actually down there, at the very bottom? How could anything possibly survive it? And after more than 60 years of trying, how little do we still really know? I'm Elijah Boone, and you're watching Astrum Earth. Join me in this video as we take a journey straight down through every layer of the ocean to the deepest hole on the planet, the Mariana Trench. We'll find out how it got there, what it would do to a human body who has dared to go, and what, if anything, is waiting for us in the dark. Our journey doesn't begin in a submarine. It begins a century and a half ago on the deck of a British sailing ship. In the 1870s, HMS Challenger set out on the first proper attempt to map the floor of the world's oceans. It was slow, brutal work. In blistering tropical heat and freezing polar cold, the crew would lower a heavy lead weight on a rope, meter after meter, until it finally touched the bottom, then haul all that cold, wet rope back up by hand and write down the number. Sounding after sounding, they built the first picture of the seabed, a flat, featureless plain of mud, 3 or 4 kilometers down. And then one day, alone in the empty ocean far to the east of the Philippines, they lowered the weight for another routine reading, and it didn't stop. Not at 3 kilometers, not at 4, not at 5. They tied on more rope, and still it kept sinking down and down beneath the thin wooden hull of their ship. Imagine standing on that deck, watching the line disappear into water so deep you couldn't picture the bottom, in an age when sailors still traded stories of sea monsters that dragged whole ships into the abyss. To them, those fears were very real. When the weight finally struck the bottom, it was more than 8 kilometers down. They had found something that would later be named the Mariana Trench, and had they drifted just a little further west, they would have found the deepest point of all, a place we now call the Challenger Deep, named after their ship. 11 kilometers down. Let me try to give you that number in a way you can actually feel. If you took Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, and dropped it into the Challenger Deep, the summit would vanish beneath the waves, and there would still be nearly 2 kilometers of water above it. The whole trench is a curved valley 2,500 kilometers long and up to 70 wide. And the Challenger Deep is only a tiny notch at one end of it, a notch that could, on its own, swallow 5 Grand Canyons. So how does a hole this deep even form? To understand that, we have to talk about the skin of our planet. The surface of the Earth is broken into enormous plates of rock, and they are all slowly moving, dragged around the globe by currents of hot rock churning far below. Picture the continents as vast icebergs, thick, ancient, and mostly hidden beneath the surface, drifting on an ocean of magma. Between them, filling the gaps, is a much thinner, much younger layer of ocean floor, thin, in relative terms, as the skin on an apple. Here is the strange part. New ocean floor is constantly being created down the middle of the Atlantic, spreading outward and pushing the continents apart. But if new crust is always being made, and the Earth isn't getting any bigger, then somewhere, that old crust has to be destroyed. The Mariana Trench is where it goes to die. All around the edge of the Pacific, the ocean floor is being forced downward, bending and sliding beneath the plates around it, sinking back into the hot mantle it came from. Geologists call this subduction. It is the biggest recycling operation on the planet, and it is violent. This ring of destruction is what powers the earthquakes and volcanoes that circle the entire Pacific, the Ring of Fire. At the trench itself, the oldest, coldest, densest slab of seafloor on Earth, some 170 million years old, is being shoved down beneath a younger plate, dragging the seabed into a scar deeper than any other on the planet. The forces involved are almost impossible to imagine. But we're not here for the geology, we're here to go down. So let's begin the descent, and the first thing we have to deal with is the thing that kills. Pressure. You felt a hint of it yourself. Dive to the bottom of a swimming pool, and within a couple of meters, your ears begin to ache. That's the weight of just a few meters of water. Now stack 11,000 meters of ocean on top of you. At the bottom of the Challenger deep, the pressure is more than 1,000 times what you feel at the surface, the equivalent of balancing a ton of weight on the surface of your thumbnail. It is enough to collapse steel, to implode equipment built specifically to survive it, and to crush the cells of any surface creature into oblivion. In 2014, an unmanned deep-sea vehicle called Nereus, a machine designed for exactly this, imploded on a dive into another deep trench and was simply gone. Military submarines, for all their power, dare not go below about 1,500 meters. To reach the true bottom, you need something extraordinary. And yet somehow, two men managed it as far back as 1960. Don Walsh, a U.S. Navy officer, and Jacques Piccard, a Swiss engineer, climbed into a vessel called the Trieste, essentially a tiny, incredibly strong steel sphere slung beneath a float, like a spherical bomb. On the way down, at around 9 kilometers, there was an enormous bang. They looked around, saw nothing obviously wrong, and remarkably decided to keep going. What they didn't realize was that one of the thick outer window panes had just cracked. They were at the absolute limit of what the vessel could survive, and they pressed on, deeper still, until they reached the bottom. It had taken them nearly 5 hours to get there. Their view was 2 tiny portholes and a small pool of light in total darkness. Their landing had kicked up a cloud of silt, so for a while they could see almost nothing at all. But then, through the murk, they saw it. A flatfish, they thought, resting on the seabed, life at the deepest point on Earth. We now think it was probably a sea cucumber, but the point stood. Something was living down there. They stayed 20 minutes, then began the long climb back to the world of light. What they did was so dangerous that no human would attempt it again for more than 50 years. To put that in perspective, in that same half-century, nearly 7,000 people climbed Everest and 12 walked on the moon. That is how hard it is to reach the bottom of our own ocean. The next person down was the film director James Cameron, who made a solo dive in 2012. Since then, a handful more have followed, and only recently did the total number of people who have visited the Challenger deep finally overtake the number who have been to the moon. The dangers have never gone away. In 2023, the world was reminded of them when the Titan submersible imploded on a dive to the Titanic, a wreck sitting at less than 4 kilometers, barely a third of the way to where we're going. Now, before we drop below the light, a quick word from the people making this journey possible. If you'd love to bury something so deep that no one could ever dig it back up, say, all your personal data scattered across the internet, but you're fresh out of submarines, don't worry. I've got the next best thing. All that information floating around online exists because of data brokers, companies that quietly collect and sell your name, your address, your phone number, your email to anyone who'll pay. That's exactly why I use Delete Me. They hunt your details down across hundreds of shady sites and scrub them, then keep scrubbing all year round. Think of it as sending your private life to the bottom of the ocean, where the creepy targeted ads and phishing scams can't follow. You can get 20% off at joindeletim.com/Astrum Earth with the code ASTRUMERTH. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. The link's in the description if you'd like your digital life a little more private. Right, deep breath, let's go down. Just below the waves, the chaos of the surface fades, and everything goes calm. Sunlight pours through the blue water around us. This top layer, the first 200 meters, is called the sunlit zone, and though it makes up only a few percent of the ocean, it holds almost all the life you've ever seen. This is where sunlight powers photosynthesis, where tiny drifting plants called phytoplankton produce roughly half of all the oxygen you breathe. Every second breath you take, in a sense, comes from up here. It's also where the whole food chain begins. Plankton eaten by tiny animals, eaten by fish, eaten by bigger fish, eaten by sharks and whales. A good reminder, really, that it's worth looking after our oceans. But we're not staying. As we sink past 200 meters, the water turns cold and dim, and we enter the Twilight Zone. There's still a faint blue glow from above, but not enough for plants to grow. And here we see something new, the first cold flickers of bioluminescence, living light made by the creatures themselves. This is where I have to start being honest with you. From here down, you'll notice I keep saying probably, possibly, and we think. That's not me hedging, it's simply the truth. We know so little about these waters that certainty would be a lie. What we do know is that this Twilight Zone is astonishingly full of life. The most abundant vertebrate on the entire planet lives here, a small fish called the bristlemoth, only a few centimeters long, but so numerous there may be quadrillions of them. That's how much life the thin skin of sunlit water at the surface can support. Keep sinking. Past a kilometer down, the last of the blue vanishes, and we enter true, permanent darkness, the midnight zone. This is the largest living space on Earth, covering more than half the surface of the planet, and we understand almost none of it. It is a steady 4 degrees, the pressure is already dangerous, and it is pitch black, except for the light the animals make themselves. And they are strange. Some have enormous eyes, straining to catch a single photon in the black. The anglerfish dangles a glowing lure in front of its own mouth, so that anything drawn to the light swims straight into a set of long, needle teeth. Others have all but given up on sight, and instead feel the water for the faintest movement of prey. And down here, things get big. The largest eyes of any animal on Earth belong to the giant squid. The biggest yet found measured 13 meters, and there's no real reason to think they don't get bigger. It's part of a pattern called deep-sea gigantism. Where food is scarce and predators are few, it can pay to grow enormous and simply outlast the hunger between meals. The deeper we go, the emptier it becomes. Less than 1% of the food that falls from the surface ever makes it this far. This is no place for gentle grazers. It's a hunting ground where the rule is simple: eat or be eaten. And then, finally, past 6 kilometers, we pass out of the midnight zone and into the deepest water of all, the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. We have arrived at the floor of the trench. Even the shallow parts of the Mariana Trench are 8 kilometers down. The seabed here is a smooth blanket of pale silt, and surprisingly, there is more life here than in the open water above. Our lights pick out mats of microbes clinging to the rocks. And here's the wonder of it: these microbes don't need the sun at all. They feed on chemicals seeping up from the volcanic rock, in a process called chemosynthesis, building life not from sunlight, but from the raw energy of the Earth itself. It isn't as efficient as photosynthesis, but down here, in the eternal dark, you make do with whatever you can get. And where those microbes grow, other things come to feed on them, and a food chain quietly turns 8 kilometers below the waves. The scavengers here are giant amphipods, and before you get too excited by giant, they're a few centimeters long, but that makes them monsters next to their millimeter-sized cousins. There are pale, translucent sea pigs snuffling across the silt. There are snailfish and cusk eels, the deepest fish we've ever confirmed. And clinging to the rocks are xenophyophores, soft blobs the size of a football that turn out to be a single living cell. One cell the size of your fist. At the surface, that's impossible. Down here, it's just Tuesday. And these oddities matter far beyond curiosity. Every time we find life pushed to a limit like this, we learn something new about how cells work, how the machinery of a living thing can bend and adapt. Some of our best medicines have come from the strangest creatures on Earth. And at these depths, nearly everything we find is strange. Now go 3 kilometers deeper still, to the very bottom of the Challenger Deep, and even the fish give up. The snailfish and eels fall away. This water, we currently believe, is simply too deep for a fish to survive, though honestly, we don't really know. And that word, no, is the whole point of this video. At the time of filming, fewer than 30 people have ever visited the Challenger Deep. That's more than have been to all the other deep trenches on Earth, combined trenches that together cover an area larger than Australia. And most of those dives were little more than extreme tourism. Drop down, tie a dead fish to a pole, film whatever swims up to nibble it, and come home. A few amphipods, a few sea slugs. That doesn't mean there's nothing else down there. It just means those are the only things that show up for a dead fish on a pole. Let me put it another way. Imagine everything we knew about the Grand Canyon came from lowering a single camera into one spot, a handful of times, at night, with a torch that lit up only a few square meters, and maybe a little basket that came back up with a spider and a couple of ants. Would you claim to understand the Grand Canyon? Of course not. And yet that is honestly how we have explored the deep ocean, an environment hundreds of times larger than the Grand Canyon. In total, we have identified only about 400 species in the entire Hadal Zone, everything, in all the deepest water on the whole planet. 400. You'd find more than that in a single freshwater lake. So here is where we end up. We have sent people to the moon. We have sent machines to Mars, to Saturn, out to the cold edge of the solar system. And yet we still know almost nothing about a place that covers more than half of our own planet. A place we could reach, in theory, in a single afternoon's descent. The deepest place on Earth is not empty. It is dark and crushing and freezing, and it is alive, in ways we are only just beginning to glimpse. What else is down there, in the parts we've never lit? I genuinely don't know. And that, to me, is the most exciting sentence in all of science, because it means the greatest discoveries on our planet aren't behind us, they're still waiting at the bottom of the sea in the dark. I'm Elijah Boone. Thanks for taking this journey with me, and I'll see you on the next one.